Everyone. Hi. Thank you for joining us for the Center of Justice and Law Spotlight Conversation series, which is where we usually host every single week. It's a series that's an ongoing series where we talk about topics on health justice and law with guests. So our focus for today will be about reproductive justice and law. I am Ubah and I'm here with my classmate Gemma, and we are students at Hamline University taking the course of health justice and law this semester. And our conversation today will be with Matt Clark. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Uh, Once again, thank you for joining us. My name again is Gemma. We have asked you to join us today because of the work and experiences that you have and the advocacy that you are doing, mostly in relationship to prison abolition. You inspire us for the work that you do and have done. Can you tell us more about the work that you are doing, please?
Yeah, where do I even begin? Um, I am I'm currently in my final year of my graduate program through the University of St. Thomas. I graduated from Hamline in 2019, which really led me on the path that I'm currently on with working within prison abolition and within restorative justice frameworks and what that looks like in higher education more specifically. A little bit more about kind of like what I've been doing, kind of what I want to do. My current program is Leadership in Student Affairs, and I have more of a concentration on, again, restorative justice and higher education in prison. My current research is examining how college and prison programs can advocate for prison abolition, and with this comes the threat of public health and law, as well as access to not only incarcerated scholars, but also for those who might be parents that are incarcerated, for those who are Black, Indigenous, and folks of color that are incarcerated, as well as the intersection of many other social identities. Yeah, I'm also back working at Hamline with Hamline University Programming Board, which has been really exciting to sort of tie in my work around what programming can then look like for folks that are incarcerated while in prison and looking for educational services. Additionally, I'm the graduate assistant in student diversity and inclusion services at the University of St. Thomas campus, where I've done programming around incarceration and equity, as well as reproductive justice while incarcerated. And those programs have kind of ignited a lot of other conversations at the undergraduate level, in the graduate level, and in the law school as well, where there's a lot of really amazing conversations that happen in relation to this very topic. I was a justice-involved youth due to my father being incarcerated when I was young. So this really encouraged me to be involved in prison reform, prison abolition, justice-involved organizations, and so on. This also really encouraged me to participate in the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program in the fall of 2018 at Hamline with Colleen Bell, which greatly influenced kind of where I am at now in my grad program and why I sort of do what I do. To kind of like close out this question in particular, I'm a current committee member for the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison, or AHEP, where currently I'm working on a board to kind of further examine students who are incarcerated or have incarcerated parents, and what that can mean for college and prison programs, and definitely, again, that threat of public health and law at the core of it, too.
Thank you. I know that you mentioned a few programs that you were part of or helping in creation. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the program and even how they came up? I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, so more specifically, some of the programs that I do in my day to day are very just educational based and very community driven. It's really important for me as a student affairs practitioner and educator to have these ties of narratives that are not often examined or talked about in higher ed be talked about more. And I know that many folks have, a stereotype or one view or one story of what incarceration can look like, especially for those who are either, currently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and the harm that that can inflict not only on that individual, but also communities as well. And working within diversity, equity, and inclusion, like I do currently, it's really important to examine that thread because it is really all an intersecting experience to have oppressed identities and then to be incarcerated on top of that, adding another layer to that. So it's really important that we are having these moments of education to further discuss that this is a lived reality, and we can't turn our backs toward our incarcerated folks that are in our own communities. And definitely with the events of last summer after the murder of George Floyd, prison abolition has been really kind of on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And what that looks like in a higher education sphere looks really different. But essentially, higher ed and prison abolition are two sides of the same coin when you really look at it. There's been a lot of research out there that kind of better looks at how higher ed and the prison industrial complex really function in really similar ways when it comes to how we like to, quote, police each other, and how there are higher up systems and kind of the watchtower and kind of all of these really dense metaphors. So kind of breaking those down for students that I work with is really important to then better understand how they can better access narratives and how they can better support their incarcerated scholars, even though that they might not even know that they're out there, but they are. Additionally, it's really important to note that Pell Grants are now available to be used through incarcerated scholars, which in 1994 was taken away under the Clinton administration, which was authored by current President Joe Biden. So it's really important that we're looking at these legal implications and what that means for our law practices currently as well.
That sounds amazing. I know that you say that you're working with like reproductive justice. Can you tell us more about that and what reproductive justice means to you?
Yeah. I think what reproductive justice means to me, and I know this is somewhat similar to kind of like the larger umbrella definition that a lot of people have, but truly it does mean to me the right to have bodily autonomy for all, and understanding the importance of social identities like that can, how we all sort of view reproductive justice. We all have different understandings, implications, socializations, and it's really important that we don't shame one another for how we are looking at reproductive justice, because it looks really different per person. And when it really comes down to sort of breaking up what reproductive justice can look like and what that can mean, it's totally per case basis. But for me personally, I look at it not only as reproductive health and not only as contraception, talking about STIs, STDs, but also what it looks like for abortive services, maternal health, what that can mean for just general access and inclusion. Additionally, I think it's really important to note that parents that are currently incarcerated in facilities, as we sort of all can assume and are aware of, the access just isn't there, and it's almost mirrored in communities on the outside of facilities as well. So it is really important to me to increase that access and to increase that awareness even more so. And additionally, I think better understanding, again, the implications that we all bring to reproductive justice conversations is really important, especially for those who might not have affinity for understanding westernized medicine and understanding what reproductive justice might look like to a cisgendered white woman in the US. That's very different per person, which I think is the beauty of it, to have those conversations, to come together to then better understand how we can be in unity when advocating for essential and equitable reproductive justice.
Just as a follow-up, how do you think will be a good way to go about advocating for reproductive justice?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned has been to talk about it. When we talk about reproductive justice, we oftentimes gloss over really important aspects of it, like what it means to trans-identified folks, for those who may not identify within the binary. And I think we need to just be increasing the conversation every single day. There's so much political ties that can come into those conversations, as well as personal experiences. And as someone who has personally like use Planned Parenthood and as a really big advocate for resources like that, I'm really comfortable talking about it, but it's being aware how other people maybe aren't comfortable talking about it and trying to find ways to better sort of creep into a space where it becomes less and less, quote, taboo. Understanding that reproductive justice doesn't just mean abortive services is really important and really crucial to better understanding and better, lifting the veil up of many folks' eyes right now. And I really do think that education and conversation really can better open the door for those conversations to happen.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there is a lot of taboo related with the reproductive justice. And I'm very glad that there's people out there thinking of those communities that maybe want to talk about it and just doesn't know the mannerism of how to go
Right.
about it. That's very nice. And going off of that, how does this relate to the work that you do?
Good question. When I was thinking about this, I was like, how does it relate to my work? And I think in the ways that it has not only personally impacted me and how much I enjoy the use of storytelling in my own work, I think it also really ties into the fact that I do work at a religious institution and I'm a student at a religious institution. And with that comes barriers when talking about reproductive justice, and how to navigate those spaces has become really important to me. So having the background and knowledge that I do of reproductive justice is really crucial, because many people on campus like don't know where to go. And I'm not the like, oh, go to Mads, like they're like this cuckoo person that like only wants to talk about this, but like people know, that like I'm here to talk about it, offer resources, connect with other people that I might have talked to on campus with their consent, like whatever that kind of looks like. And additionally, reproductive justice, as a public health issue, and how racism is also a public health issue, and that intersection has become really crucial for me to talk about in many of the conversations I have with students that are maybe coming to better understand their outlooks, their views, their identity, and what that might mean to them. And additionally, with the work that I do with the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison, we're looking specifically at those folks who are incarcerated parents currently, who either are pregnant, who recently gave birth within or outside of a facility, and those who may have been unable to, nurse their child, their baby, or stay connected to their child before they were incarcerated. So that work in particular has really sort of not even like it's opened my mind even more so to the other implications that come just with the work that I do. But it also has really broadened my horizons on how to talk about these things, not only within a religious institution, but also within some of my like friendships and some of my connections, and what that might look like for folks who maybe don't have the same access that I have had to these educational experiences, my own personal background, and so on. So I think everything that I kind of do circles around not only looking at higher ed in prison, but also it really does come down to the facets of reproductive justice and kind of what that can mean, because there's also mental health care in there too. So it's a really it's a wild web that I weave of how I like to discuss these things and how I've been able to come up across these things. But yeah, I think those are just like some of the main instances of what that looks like for me.
Yes, I agree. You mentioned that there is an intersection between this and racism, and also you mentioned mental health. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I appreciate the offering of that question. And by no means am I an expert on what that looks like, but definitely in my own research and in understanding these topics better, there is obviously a very clear indication that Black women and Indigenous women and Latinx women are disproportionately impacted by the lack of access to reproductive health care and what that can look like within a community. And that's not just racism, that's white supremacy, and what that looks like being inflicted on already oppressed communities, and what that then looks like generationally is really impactful. So intergenerational trauma and what can happen to, a woman who is maybe pregnant and is incarcerated, has their child within a facility, well, technically outside of a facility, but still chained to a bed, and what that can mean for that mother or for that parent, and then how that trauma is inflicted on their child, then understanding, how their birth process was. And for most folks, that does carry a lot of trauma. Additionally, for folks who are within the Indigenous community, what that means for spiritual practices and implications is also really important to note too. So all of these things are under this umbrella of white supremacy, and how that power has really inflicted and impacted communities of color many times over, just based on the fact, again, that whiteness has been such a superior complex, and what that can then mean for healthcare, reproductive health, and then what that can look like for folks who are trans, folks who are women identifying, and folks that are femme identified within that sphere too. So it's, as we all know, it's really complex, and it's really it's hard for individuals, I will say for white individuals, to see all those things and try to break that up. And that's not only privilege, but it's also fragility too. There are many conversations that I've sort of been a part of where it just is like, oh, sorry that's happening. It's just like, you gonna do something about it? Because like every time someone like me or like other folks like try to approach that, they're like, we'll figure it out down the line. And that's just not like the so many things. I could say so many things, but like that's just like not the correct way, of course, of going about how to further increase access to reproductive health care and reproductive justice to, all really, because it's not just a cis women's issue. It is an everybody issue when you really take it apart.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a beautiful explanation of everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think what this even raises in mind is that if these things are actually happening outside of like prison, like what could that look like in prison? And it's, the more I think of it, the more I'm digging myself into a deeper thing where no one really is bringing up or even bringing those like important tables that needs to be discussed. And yes, it does need resolution, like it needs to be worked on, and it's going on beyond than it should ever be. And so in leading to my next questions, what are some like research or even experience that you've had related to this topic? And so I know that you've mentioned early on that the passion that you have from like doing works like this is also has to do with the fact that your dad was also like an incarcerated person, and that kind of pushed you in the edge of like looking into how you can change people who live in those prisons for the better and give them better services that they can get better than they're getting right now. So
yeah. Not only like, so for a bit of background, I'm the youngest of three girls. And so, that's three girls, and then my mom, and then when my dad was incarcerated, it was a very feminine energy really coming from, the call was coming from inside the house. Like it was very much so like all of these things, all these experiences that the four of us had, I think was very impactful to me understanding what feminism looked like to me, and what access to health and reproductive like healthcare looked like even from a young age. And I think it wasn't until junior high where I really started to piece together the trauma and the impact of what having my father incarcerated looked like for me, because I was 8 at the time. So like that's a really formative time for little baby me. So I think it is really important that I do reflect on those experiences, not only what that meant to like my family, what that meant to my dad, but like really what it does mean to me. My dad took part in college and prison programs when he was incarcerated, and I didn't know that until high school when I was looking at going to colleges, and I really didn't want to go to school, but I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it for my dad, and for the rest of my family too, because we were all impacted by that. And that really did sort of lead me on like a very interesting journey through communication studies, through women and gender studies, through finding my queer identity, through finding out just like who I was as a person. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I took the Inside Out Prison Exchange program with Colleen Bell fall of 2018, and that was not only one of like the most crucial learning moments for me, but also one of the most helpful reflective experiences I think I've ever been a part of. You know, I was just recently writing about this for my capstone project. I remember going and visiting my dad for the first time and being like, where the hell am I? Like, why am I going through these giant metal detectors? Like, I have nothing on me except for one time I did have like a McDonald's toy in my pocket, and the guards were like, no. And like, it was so scary. And that sticks out in my mind. But that's another story. But then I remember going to the Shakopee Women's facility and going through the metal detectors and doing the sign-in process. And I was like, instantly transported back to that moment when I was a young kid. And it was very crucial for me to do that, I think, at the time, because I, you know, was about to graduate the following May. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I knew I liked working in higher ed. I knew I liked working in student affairs, but I didn't know just how close the connections really were for me until I took that course. And not only was it from, you know, just the content of the course, but actually being with the quote inside students while being an outside student, and what that meant to learn together, and what I took away from that class has really just encouraged what I do now even tenfold. And I think all of those things have led me to where I'm at now and where I want to go. So I'm a big old nerd about like everything higher ed and prison, which is a privilege to be able to have access to those things, as well as a very, again, critical reflective moment for me to reflect on my own experiences. It's having a foot in two worlds, really, when it comes to that. Yeah, it's been a wild time, but I'm very thankful for the experiences. Though they may have been traumatic, they have really turned into a moment of growth. And I think one of the things that I really want to do is to just, again, really further those conversations around what that looks like, because the reality is many folks that take college credit courses while incarcerated, once they are, you know, welcomed back into their communities, into their societies, like whatever that might look like for them, many folks either don't continue on the college journey, or if they do, many folks at their institution might not know that. Additionally, a lot of individuals that just don't know, or like are aware that there are previously incarcerated students on almost every college campus, is really harmful, because it decreases accessibility. There's a lot of there's a lot of room for just errors to happen that could further harm a student that may have been previously incarcerated, especially for those who might be at a religious institution, just based on their own experiences. That's another whole other 30-minute long conversation, but those are just some of the research and experiences and conversations that I've been having recently on those things in particular to me.
I think you're the second person, the second guest who has mentioned the Inside Out Prison Exchange program, which I think that sounds like a great program to be in. Mm-hmm. I have a question. Is your research including like detention centers, like for immigration? And if it is, like, even if it's not, can you tell us about how you're going about your research, what you are finding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that insight around detention facilities. At the time, currently, I'm not looking specifically at that, but that has been a really prominent thread throughout the like references that I've been going through. And I think in many years, if I ever do a doctoral program, I'll maybe, indefinitely. Like, I want to be working on this research like the rest of my life. But I think if I continue more specifically, I do want to ensure that that is included into any public facing research, but it is also something that I think I'm carrying with me in my backpack of references when I do talk about it, because it is really important that we do address that the disparity that is there too, within the larger conversation around prison industrial complex and mass incarceration generally. But currently, my graduate program asks in our last semester to do a capstone project, which can look kind of however you want, which is really exciting to me as a relatively creative person that likes writing but is really done with writing 30-page long papers at this point. I've been in higher ed for 6 years. I am tired. But I have been able to find out how I want to approach this project. So my capstone title is "From the Inside Out: How College and Prison Programs Advocate for Prison Abolition," which I know sounds a little backwards, but it's true. The reason why college and prison programs exist is so one day they don't have to exist. So they're actively working to better bridge the gap between recidivism and what that looks like for educational experiences, and then what that can look like for, in a capitalistic view, job advancement and career placement too, which is one of the realities of why folks go to higher ed too, which, again, for the third time, whole other conversation. But my capstone is looking at the history of college and prison programs, which is a very, very dense and complex history, as well as the history of policing and prison in general, then followed by the outline of kind of what prison abolition looks like currently and what it has looked like and where it's going. So been reading a lot of abolitionist works from, of course, Angela Y. Davis, and it's just been a really formative and impactful time to not only revisit some of those works that I was reading in undergrad, but now currently with, the state of not only our state, but like nationally, of what we're looking at when it comes to abolition and reform, and how transformative and restorative justice all work together in that sense. But in addition to kind of a shorter paper, I will be doing a podcast to not only better convey the information, but to make it even increasingly more accessible, just so it is not just, another resource list with another dissertation type paper that you have to spend an hour going through. I'm really keen on making sure that people that are also incarcerated will have access to it. And from a lot of my conversations with folks that are currently doing this work more actively, full-time, professionally, a lot of them have really sort of shared that like they don't have access to scholarly resources like JSTOR and all of those really incredible resources that we have, but they do have access to other websites where I could post a podcast so they could get this information. So I think making it accessible to the population that I'm specifically talking about is really crucial to me. So that's going to be my end product. So I hope to, do that soon because I have to, but also I'm really just looking forward to it because even after I graduate this May, I'm really committed to keeping up with it. I've had incredible conversations with other folks in the field that are doing this work actively. That has really sort of shifted how I view my work and kind of where I want to go in my work as well.
That seems like a great project at the end. I hope you can send it to us so we can
Yes.
read it.
Yeah, I am very glad that you've mentioned a lot of these things because also, like right now, I'm in the learning process as well too. Like I am learning as you're telling us, which is very wonderful and great. And like I'm already having and getting ideas in my head what things that I can possibly look into or get into. And so, with that being said, I know that we're a little bit tight on time, but what are like how can we support you and elevate you with the work that you do, and what is like I guess a call of action to like our audience?
Yeah. Talk to me about it. I want to talk about it all the time. But also talk to each other. I really want people to have these conversations with family members, friends, colleagues, your neighbor. I think it's really important to, again, better have these narratives be more forward facing. Additionally, I think that is also a very weird privilege I have had in my life, to be able to openly talk about incarceration within my family because it impacted us all. So I know it's really weird to have those conversations, with elders in your community, with parents, with cousins, with aunts, because we all have different views on incarceration. We really do. And that's one of the biggest things that I think I've really sort of discovered through conversations and through research, is we've all been impacted by incarceration, by police, in very different ways. Whether it's been media, clickbait news, like YouTube hacks, like TikTok, like all of these really amazing resources that are out there, but how we interpret them or how they are shared to us can be harmful, not only for those who might not have ties to incarceration, but of course for those who were previously incarcerated or who were just as involved. So again, it's talking about it, it's sharing resources, it is adequately doing, due diligence when it comes to researching these things. I'm a really big believer, again, in just being able to have spaces such as this one today, to have people come and talk about their experiences, their research. I think it is fundamentally really important. And I think we also additionally need to think of new ways to view incarceration and to view prison abolition, because it seems like such dirty words sometimes. And as someone who started college in 2015, like feminism was a bad word. Like it was like, ooh, you're a feminist, social justice warrior. But like now that we're in 2021 and all of these things are so critically important to understanding, to better unlearn these things and to work towards a better society where there is active equity, we need to be rethinking the ways in which we are not only talking, learning, and educating about these things, but how we personally are viewing and interacting with these elements as well.
Yeah, I do agree. And like as you mentioned a few minutes ago, that reproductive justice is actually everything that involves within it, which essentially just says that health is anything that can impact your health, whether that is your work or the people or the society that you're in.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being with us. And I can just imagine how busy you are. So thank you for spending time with us here.
Of course.
Also, if anybody's watching, please be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. The next spotlight will be next Thursday, April 1st, with Ashley Lovell, who is a dweller, and she will be talking about prison dweller from 11:30 to noon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mads, for joining in today. We greatly appreciate your time and your conversation, as well as sharing your experience, which is very important.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be in this space and for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.